Hey, so you want to learn some JavaScript, is that right? Hi, my name is Lauren, and maybe you're visiting this site because you have a class coming up with me. I do a little bit of teaching about various different programming languages. JavaScript, I think, is a great introduction right now because it's so dang popular out there. Let's take a look at this copy of Chrome by right-clicking and choosing Inspect. Oh, okay. There's a lot of elements on this page that we can investigate as to how they are laid out. Mousing over, it starts to highlight above some of the stuff that's there. Let's go to another, maybe even busier site, reddit.com. It has a new look. Let's go back to the even busier old look that they have. Did they let us do that? Old Reddit. And then this, maybe you've been on this site in the past, where there's just a lot of different entries there listed out. Let's do that same trick while we right-click and do Inspect to take a look at all the little nuances, the little pieces here on this site. And as we mouse over different portions, then it's going to highlight, as you see above, divs and paragraphs and other things. What does that have to do with JavaScript at all? Well, these play nicely, certainly on the browser, to be able to get access to changing dynamically colors on a page, or just having things in motion, or all manner of server interactivity, sending things back over to the server, asking questions of it. This kind of trickery can happen best in this day and age through JavaScript. So getting started with our JavaScript class actually has with it, well, a little bit of HTML. I'm curious, let's say, to find out of these different divisions which are out on the page, these divs, how many of them might there be? We find that these, it's a class of entry, and it's unvoted. Maybe entry is going to be every last one of these guys. If we take a look at this next one down, the Independence Day greetings from the Overlook Hotel, if we just scroll down in the code, it's possible we would eventually get to that exact entry. There it is, in fact. And this one is a class of, what, a thing, but getting down a little bit further into that same nestled in part. If we click on that little expander, then here's some stuff that's subordinate. We have a little paragraph at the left, a span, a div. We were kind of in this sort of text part last time there, and entry. So here it is again. It's a div that has a class of entry. What does all that mean? These are divisions on the page. Rectangular areas are divs. They can have, as you see, text or images inside, and they can do cool tricks like having background colors or other sort of styling, borders around them, and other things. Let's play with that a little bit, I think, as we get further on here. I wonder how many down are we? There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's the 10th thing, it looks like, is this Independence Day thing. As I mouse over there, then great, I can see it very easily from this inspect as I'm going out and inspecting the elements on the page. This HTML page has with it many elements. Div is one flavor of them, a lot of things there. We won't go into the descriptions of all this. This is officially is supposed to be this JavaScript focus, so let's get into the JavaScript parts of this. Inside of this div, there's other stuff as well. Let's call that all that other stuff, all the stuff that's represented by this ellipsis here. How about that's inner HTML? And then if we were to look at this whole div at large, maybe that's then the outer HTML. We'll find that that's the actual names of things as we go into JavaScript and want to then work with these. To get into the JavaScript side of the stuff, how about we go then to the console? Console is a place where I can type in JavaScript commands and get some response. So let's see. It's actually somewhat common to see on professional sites some of this failure to load things, but I think probably this is just from a little cute pop-up blocker that I have installed, that some of that is going on. If you don't like seeing these messages and such, if you want to start like kind of with a clean slate, then here's a trick. If you're on Mac, then you can press Command K, or you can just hit this Ghostbuster symbol. Oh, okay, nice and clean slate to work with there. Starting with any web page whatsoever, from the perspective of JavaScript, and that's where we are now. I mean, this console is all about JavaScript. From that perspective, we will have a window object. We will always have that. It represents the entire, well, tab, I might say. A window in this day and age, it really only represents a tab, not actually the whole. We can't know about other neighboring tabs. So like the largest thing that I can see from my JavaScript code is this specific window. And that window object indicates that there's a lot of things you can do with it. Let's take a look at, on the window, there happens to be a document, and that represents the HTML part inside of the tab, the entire set at large. Of that document object, we can go and find things by the various different class names. If you had recalled, all of these divs, 10th one down being this thing, well, all of those divs that have this text happen to be then an entry, if you recall. Let's take a look at, first of all, how many of them might there be. We can get these elements by various different mechanisms. There's all the 5 ways that are fairly common then. From the context of the whole document, let's see if we can find them by a class name. And the class name of all of those divs, it had said that it was entry. So when we are using JavaScript, note we have objects that we might be working with and a dotted notation to navigate between objects. So of the whole tab itself, the window, then we've navigated with this dotted notation into kind of a sub-object, if you will. It's something that's stuck onto the window as a document. And then from the context of the document, we can run these things that describe a little bit more about it. And this is a little method to find out, or a function to find out more about this object. So of the document object, run this function, get things by a class name. That class name, then we can type in whatever we want here. Then entry was the one that we had seen over there. If we do this, there'll be a whole lot of them come back potentially. Oh my goodness, look at that. 26 apparently it looks like. And as we start to mouse over these guys, if we expand this out, there's all these divs around. Oh, mousing over them causes that it's starting to actually go around to some of these. We see it highlighted above. So the nice thing about this console window, when we have found an object that is in existence out there in the land of HTML, in the real page, this is very easy to work with then. Here it says that the 10th entry, we counted it was the 10th entry down. Well, it has an offset of number 9, strangely enough. I wonder why that might be. Well, in the world of JavaScript, we often start counting things with a number 0. So the 10th thing in really is, well, numbered number 9 over here in JavaScript land. What we have gotten back by asking this question of the document object, please get these elements by class name, is in fact this HTML collection. And there's all those objects that came around. It's similar to an object that we'll describe more of as we go forward here. It's similar to an object which is called an array. An array is something which can hold multiple things. They don't have to be the same kind of thing. They could be a lot of different things. But it's just containers in which you would have a numerical offset in which things might exist. Let's try to focus on that 10th item by running that same code again. I'm going to clear this window, and then using the up arrow on my keyboard, I'm able to get back the last thing that I ran. And if I do a square bracket and the number 9, what this is to say is of all the 26 things which have come back, let's try to index into the 10th thing. I promise that as we move forward, this will become clearer as we go along. I would encourage you, don't become too flustered with this crazy punctuation and syntax. I mean, more than just to say, all right, dotted notation to be able to go and navigate between objects or to call functions. That's important. So far, we've seen that that's a behavior. Further, we hadn't described it, but these parentheses, the Shift 9 and Shift 0 on your keyboard, these parentheses are able to have parameters to come in. So as we ran this function, we then have passed in an idea to please find it by this idea of entry. And then finally, final thing that we're seeing right now is these square brackets apparently are able to work with things that kind of look like an array and somehow be able to find an item in there by a numerical value. In here, 0 through 9, okay, the 10th thing in. If we do that, we do get just that one div back, and then doing a mouse over, sure enough, it knows, okay, that's the one that we're intending to focus upon then. Let's see if we absolutely need all of this code. I mean, we've gone very specifically from the whole tab itself, go on down. might it be that there is a concept of someone like a default? And sure enough, there is. Do I always have to say window every time? The window object has a lot of things on it, and we get a lot of very good behavior from it. But because it's so common, it is then also the default object. So I can actually just start in with document. If I highlight this for just a moment, let's put that on the clipboard and paste it back down in here. So if I were to say then document and that same exact thing, I get the same exact thing back. I didn't have to say window every time. Again, then just because it is the default object. It is also kind of a global thing. It's like the root of it all, if you will. Let's see what happens if I were to now specify a variable. The way that we do this in JavaScript, let's say we want to hold on to this concept, this thing that we got back, this div. Imagine, could I put, now normally we think about variables like in algebra or something as being like a number. Like let's say that var x is equal to 5, var y is equal to 10. And you ask then, well, what is x plus y? Well, okay, it should hopefully add both of those guys together, and sure enough, then you get to number 15. Normally in algebra, if you've taken some of that in the past, then you might have utilized these sorts of variables. And that will work here as we see, but can you imagine that variables could also hold other stuff? In fact, these divs could be inside of variables themselves. That's where it starts to become powerful. We're going to get a lot further along as we move forward here. Let's say that now var x is equal to all of that thing I had on the clipboard, that document, get element by class name of entry, and then the 10th one in. And actually, I really have been cheating. Should I confess this? I should be putting a semicolon at the end of these statements if it is, well, adhering to the JavaScript standard that's kind of most popular right now, the ES5 specification. So putting a semicolon at the end, that indicates that this is the end of a whole statement. That's just one thought. Go ahead and run that thing. Now, if I were to ask what x is, okay, it is that div. It's holding on to it. It's got kind of a name for it. Y is still equal to 10. I wonder if I could do x plus y. Any votes on this? Oh, trying to add what is a whole object, an HTML div element, and then trying to somehow add it to the number 10. Well, JavaScript just kind of does its best and says, I guess I'll tack these things together for you. I mean, adding in this case, I'll just put it together as being this piece of text. What I have as being a result here, in fact, is a string. We call pieces of text here in the coding world, we call these guys strings. What if y was equal to taco? That's a string. I'm going to start to adhere a little bit better to having this semicolon at the end, try to get you guys into some best practices here as we move forward. If you miss out on the semicolon, just as you've seen so far, like it won't care too much, because guess what? The ES6 standard does not require it, but boy, the ES5 standard, it should be a part of it. So the most contemporary code, great, we'll try to adhere to those kinds of standards. Now if I say x plus y, as you might expect, well, we saw that somehow that div had equated to this strange piece of text then. Internally it figured it out and decided that that was a great name for it. Well, x plus y then is equal to that same thing, and then taco appended at the end here. When we are adding strings together, really the thought process of that, the technical term for that is concatenation, to stick them together. We can concatenate any sort of strings together that we want, and some stuff, like if it's not originally a string, like it'll just say, well, I guess I'll convert it to a string for you and just do my best and try to make it work out. Such is the kind of just fly by the seat of the pants nature of JavaScript a little bit. We have this as being, it'll just do its best to kind of do a lot of things in the background. Often it would not be actually what you intended, so we'll see as we move forward that there's a little bit of snags we might hit along the way with this. Moving forward with a little bit of the coverage here, let's try then, as we have the variable x that really represents this div, let's see what we could potentially do with this. I'm going to clear the window down below. I could press on this Macintosh machine Command K, it says here, to be able to do that, or Control L as well. So if you like keyboard shortcuts, that's a nice one, I guess. I'll just do that. A little keyboard shortcut, make that easier. With this x variable, if I just do a dot, thankfully, inside of Chrome's way of looking at JavaScript, it can start to see all the stuff that is possible on this div thing. And boy, there's a lot of it. I wonder what might be this offset left or offset top. Let's ask those questions. All right, X, what do you have as an offset top? 877. What that's to mean actually is a number of pixels. If we were to count every little spot on the screen, every little area that can light up, like when you move the cursor, the smallest amount that you can move, it just moves up one little notch at a time. That's a pixel. If we were to count 877 of those, that would be the very top of this page, all the way up here, where it all begins. So that's offset top. Offset left should be a lot less, because then that comes from the very left part or inside of whatever container it might have had. It would then been the offset from the inside of the container. Offset left, 159 apparently is the number of pixels over there. So there's all kinds of little math that we can start to do, or things we can identify about these divs. Let's see what else is possible. I'll clear the thing again here. We can blur it or click it, act as if it was clicked anyway. We can do things with when it is clicked, have some behavior. Ooh, that gets interesting. Could you imagine, start to have some interactivity, like when somebody clicks on this div, take some sort of an action, have some new code that runs, is what that's to mean. There's a lot of these on this, on that, on blur, on cancel, on this, on that, on drag. My gosh. This starts to allow that our web page would have interactivity on focus, on load. As you come to the class, boy, there'll be a lot of this that we get into, but just as a sideline note, let's say that these guys are events. We can now be able to handle the event that somebody has moved a mouse over the guy entering this div area and then on the screen. If you start to move 877 pixels down apparently from the top, then you start to get into this territory of this div, and there is where it might be then. We can have, how about style? That's another, there's a lot of these on things, aren't there? A lot of events. Scrolling way down, there's style. This is a really popular one, and we're going to use this one now. How about we try to change the background color of this div? Now, JavaScript, the way we're using this, JavaScript is married very nicely along with this HTML that we're working with. It would be terrible of me to omit, though, the thought that a lot of this HTML is really getting styled by a thing that is called CSS. So this style that is mentioned here, maybe you've heard of the thought that HTML and CSS go well together, and sure enough, and then in fact with JavaScript, you're able to address those individual CSS things. So let's now do x.style, and we can work with some sort of a piece of the style. And boy, there's a lot of different things, background color being one of them. I would invite you to just scroll around through this at some point and see all the different stuff with margins and borders, and my gosh, there's just a lot available. With background color, let's say that the background color, in fact, should be set to red. And put a semicolon at the end. This is a valid JavaScript statement. Oh, and sure enough, there it is. It turned. My gosh. What if we say that it's just empty? Oh, turn it back to kind of transparent. Is white the same as might be an empty? No, it's not. Even though it visibly looks the same, if there were other things that might have been poking around behind it, they would now have been covered up with this fully opaque white background going on there. That's just maybe a sideline thing. So change that to whatever color you like. There are a lot of named colors, and there's other tricks that we can do with like specific, very finely tuned colors with like color palettes and such. Different amounts of red, green, and blue can combine to make virtually any color that that your eye can perceive. It's not absolutely every color. It's not a perfect thing. But in the color space, it's like pretty rich and pretty varied. I mean, it's every bit of the nuances that a nice photograph that you view on the screen can have, like every bit of that color in the most beautiful scene of trees or a river or something, and the gentle nuances of the coloration of water or something, flowers and such. Then you can get all those subtle color differences. You can put that, any color like that you want, any shade could be made as being this background color. There's a lot of tricks yet that we can explore even further, like what if we wanted to have a gradually shifting range of color, like if it was to be dark blue and then it starts to move as we go over like into a lighter blue and such. We might call that a gradient. And there's cool tricks with our style to be able to make gradient colors as well. You can really make it look kind of garish as well if you do too much perhaps. Let's go back to maybe having just a transparent background. And then what about another thing that we can do, a border? Let's make a green border. And this one requires, or at least will accept, 3 parameters. The first one is the width of the border. Let's say that it's 3 pixels wide. Just like we had seen that we were 877 little splotches down from the top on this. Well, we'll make it 3 little pixels wide, 3 of those units of measurement. There are other units of measurement for those that are into typesetting. Maybe you've heard of something called a point, which is a 72nd of an inch. There's other units of measurement as well, inch and such, that we can utilize here. But pixels are fairly common to work with on a web surface like this. We can make it solid or dashed, or there's others. And then we can make it a certain color, like in this case we'll make it green. Oh, and there it is. It's a solid 3 pixel wide green border that we've just specified on this object. Recall, if you want to, just for a moment, consider with me, along with me, what had happened to make this all happen. We've gotten this div into this variable name of x. If we ask what x is, sure enough, then it's that div. And then we've gone into, on this object, which is the div, we've gone into another property that it has, and then worked further with the final property of border, and we're able to set that. As you come out to the JavaScript class, boy, this sort of naming of things, you're going to see a lot of this flying around, and really bear with us, honestly, as you approach this, because it can be incredibly intimidating at first to try to think like, well, I don't think I'll ever know all this stuff. And in fact, virtually no developer does know all this stuff. You're in good company. People are searching around on Google all the time on popular websites to try to find answers to how do you do this and how do you do that. All that we're up to, all that any good developer starts out with the tricks of the trade, and even experienced developers as well, it's just how to find the answers. That's all we're going for. And when you come out of class, don't get intimidated, or get intimidated as least as you can. Put that aside if you can, and just work with us and just be immersed, be exposed to this sort of idea, and then it'll come eventually. Then it'll come naturally for you. Like, all right, I don't know everything, and gosh, I don't think we ever could regarding computers, but gosh, I know how to find the answer, and that's where the power is. That's where you get powerful and get well respected, and you get paid. Maybe I might like to call it like you get paid the medium bucks, so to speak, to do this good stuff. Let's see how we got started with that. We had said that a variable called x was going to be equal to from the window. We didn't have to say window because it's the default object. Then we could say underneath window, which is the tab, then we could say that we wanted to get to the document and then find one of these guys by a class name. Let's just review how did that look. So it's document get elements by class name, and then the class name, this being a function, we could put in parentheses and then specify it. And for all functions, by the way, there's parentheses that are used. So there's another rule to kind of tuck under your hat there. If you see that we're doing a dotted thing and it doesn't have parentheses, like x.style.border, there's no parentheses there, well, then what we're using here are properties. Properties are these objects. From that div object, it has a style property on it, and then further a border property. It's not functions at all. But then if you see that there's some sort of a name and then it has the parentheses on board, then you know, absolutely you know, that that thing is a function. So this is the dead giveaway in this case, working with functions. Finally, then what we had back was an HTML collection, and we chose, let's queue up and find the 10th member therein. And that's how we had set up X in the first place. Let's just finally do one last style thing. How about, let's do a margin right, x.style. Now there's various different flavors of margin. There's just general margin all around, or you can have all these 4 different sides be represented. So a margin right, let's say that it's equal to 100 px. Wait a minute though, that 100 px. Now while it is kind of a number, I mean the number 100 is in there, because we have other stuff on it, guess what? That is a string. Strings need to go inside of quotes. We haven't told you this rule yet, so that's important perhaps for us to clarify, I guess. We had put the entry inside of quotes. It is a string as well. As we were trying to find things based on a name, then a string was being put in there as well. Same with when you'd set up this border. Okay, strings, they go into quotes. Or ticks. I'll call this apostrophe around this guy. I'm going to call that ticks. That's kind of a slang term, but it's a fairly common one that we use in the world of programming. And doing that, it looks like it's shuffled over some space. In fact, exactly 100 pixels worth of space then is over at the right now reserved for other stuff to exist. Or if I do 500, oh nice, okay, now it's like chunked it down even further. So I have some more space on the right to have things around. Now finally, and if you're mystified, again, maybe I'm saying it too much, but like really don't worry, just get immersed, I think, and you can identify, is this really for you or is it maybe not for you or whatever. Programming is something I think that it's a good thing to just kind of take at a leisurely pace initially and just really let it become a part of you, I think, as you begin. Defining a variable of z, let's say, let's see if we can make our own array of things. And an array being multiple things that can be all together in a sequence, well, let's put inside of our array just some numbers to start with. The way to make an array is with a square brackets. I guess it might be confusing because earlier we were using square brackets just to queue up to a specific numerical offset inside of an array of stuff. Well, okay, it also is used even to define the array itself. Like if we do counting by fives, 5, 10, 15, they're comma separated, 20, 25, and 30. So we have 6 members in there in our array, and that now has defined it. If I do of that z variable, here's the things that arrays know how to do. One of the properties happens to be length. So let's do that one. Oh yes, sure enough, there's 6 things. If I look at the last one, it would be, well, actually offset of 5. Yeah, that is the last one. The number 30 in there was the last number that we had placed. Nice one. What if I'm out of bounds? What if I try to go one more or a lot more? It's not defined. Try to go way out of bounds, or even like in the negatives. There's no offset of -1. Just the lowest number that we can hit, the very first member that's therein, would then be an offset of 0, with a square bracket 0. A thing to know is you can define an array with the square brackets, as we see, and then further, once an array is defined, so z being an actual array, the square brackets are what then queues up to be able to reference an individual member inside. Let's say of an array that counts by 3s, 3, 6, 9, and 12, just have those 4 members therein. If that is an array, so I haven't applied it to be a part of a variable name, could I actually just say immediately thereafter, from this array, get the third thing out, which is the number 9. So in this case, part of these square brackets had been to say this is an array, and then this guy had been to say, please find the third member therein. We'll do all kinds of nutty things with punctuation. Like as we move forward, as you come out to class, there'll be some moderately fast-paced things going on. We'll have some code that you can steal, thankfully, and you can kind of review back on this. Come out to class a few times, I don't know, just be immersed, really. Be in study groups about this and see what other people are doing. Google around, and now that you just kind of get a little bit of the ropes, so to speak, you just kind of get in the initial sort of take of what this is. This is a good place, you're armed and dangerous, you can now move forward and really Google around and start to become dangerous, as it were. You haven't seen perhaps an error message come up for me yet here. Don't worry, it's pretty common as you get started. You might have some little flubs here and there. It's not a big deal. We celebrate error messages in class. You'll see that as you come out. Let's take a look, for instance, at an error message that we can contrive one. How about divide by 0? Anything divided by 1 is itself, but when you get down to dividing by a lower number than that, it starts to get pretty much close to infinity. And then dividing by 0, I don't know, there's not a good answer necessarily about that. So infinity, it would have. Other languages might say, well, it's a divide by 0 error, in fact. Is this any different, by the way, if we have this 5 without a dot and a 5.0 and divide those out? Let's see, if we say that 5 is divided by 2, 2.5, it converted it from what was like whole numbers, as it were, down to something that has a decimal part on it. Those are actually 2 different things, surprisingly. An integer type of a thing and then a floating point type of a thing. Not that that maybe matters terribly inside of JavaScript, but other languages, if you're going to learn JavaScript with the intent to interact with other programming languages in the future, it might be good to know that sometimes these types are subtly different. While all languages might have things like strings and numbers and such, the way that they work with them might slightly differ. As we get further along in code, you might find that there's some nuances to know about. So JavaScript, it's very forgiving, very freewheeling, very pliable, but that's both good and bad. And this will help you to get some good programming practices. You can do all kinds of cool tricks with algorithms and all kinds of other things. But bear in mind that it's also considered in many circles to be kind of a flimsy language in some ways, just due to the way that it's kind of, I'll just do my best effort and kind of try to stick things together for you. One last thing that we'll talk about as we prepare for having you come out to class, let's put together a function so that we have a piece of code which can run. This is kind of a neat thing. Let's say that var f is equal to a new function. That's a keyword. And the function will say that we can take a variable inside. Only in the context of this function we'll have this idea that there is something called x. The function has then one or more multiple lines of code that could exist inside. We open up this block of code with a curly brace. So this would be a line which would start to define a new function. Pressing enter, it doesn't actually complete anything yet. I go to the next line, it's like expecting some more. This is not the full story. The environment understands, hey, you're not done here. So, and if yours doesn't, then just actually press shift enter and it should allow you to go to the next line and continue to specify things. Let's see if we could return something based on x. So the return is another keyword. Var is a keyword. We see the coloration there. It's the same as function and return. These three are just JavaScript keywords themselves. It's like a part of the JavaScript language. The other stuff, these parentheses and other punctuation and such, are just these expected ways in which things are structured. So functions must utilize parentheses, both when they are being defined and also when they're being run. If we scroll up, something which is built into the browser to be able to find that div was this getElementByClassName, and that is actually a function because it uses parentheses. And it accepts this text-based piece to come on inside, and then be able to find based on that. In this here, we're able to define our own cool function. We're going to take in that variable. We could have taken in multiple variables, by the way, but let's just keep it simple to start with. And we'll return x multiplied by itself. That is a statement. That is a whole statement to say that we'd like to return something, so I'll conclude it with a semicolon. Interestingly, the function itself doesn't need a semicolon after it, the definition of that given function, but the fact that we're saying that var f should be equal to a function, that thought is also a statement, and as such it will need a concluding semicolon in a moment here. So going to a final line, we'll conclude this set of code, just one line in this guy, and we see that it's trying to indicate that it's balanced. It's underlined this concluding curly and as well the opening curly. If I were to mouse around, it's not highlighted anymore, but if I mouse above or near this other opening curly, sure enough, then it is also underlined this closing curly. This is to say that these guys work in tandem with one another. They are kind of balanced. Similarly, if I go to the opening and closing parentheses, all around there, it's trying to say these guys balance against each other. When we get things that are a lot more intricate, that will be extremely helpful to understand, well, from this opening punctuation piece, then here's then a corresponding closing piece for it. So this is now a balanced set, and as was mentioned as well, this should really have a semicolon at the end because we're saying that f should be equal to something. So that idea is a statement in and of itself. Inside of that, it's a function that has yet another statement inside. It could have had many, but it just has the one. And now we have this new cool thing called f. If we'd like to run it, so functions are both defined by having parentheses, and then as well, if I just say f, all it says that this thing is then a function. In fact, it spits out the entire definition of how this function works. It takes in x and it returns x squared, essentially, multiplied by itself. Well, then I can run this whole function by saying f, let's say, of 10, and it brings back the number 100. Sure enough, f of 6 is 36. F of 9 is 81. So this is able to take in these whole numbers, multiply them against themselves, and then return a value. Could we say that we call f, and then inside we also call f yet again? What would it be if it was just f of 5? Well, that's 25. But then if I multiply 25 against itself, 25 squared is 625. Do you think that we could run it once and then have it with whatever result, as it would spit back the number 25 from within, you see? Could it also then run again? Oh, sure enough. So we can have functions nested, well, with other functions inside to the nth degree. Or perhaps I could say that num, I should really, if I'm defining a variable, I should really say var num, is equal to, let's say, a function of 5. Now, num really should be holding 25. We can confirm that. And then I could say then f of num, and then that brings back 625 as well. So that'd be like 2 lines to do the same thing. But I could also, as we see, just have it all in one line. Hopefully that makes some sense to you. It runs the inner stuff first. That's something to know. When we have parentheses to be able to say, here's some other little inside stuff going on, it runs the innermost thing first. So actually, technically, it actually ran this idea of, hey, let's get this idea together of the number 5. So it put together inside of itself. JavaScript said, okay, I have this concept now. There's the number 5, and I guess that now will be passed into this function, and let's run it and see what happens. If you recall, we had x equal to the div a little while ago. Here we had used x as well inside of this guy. Somehow I got flipped over to the source there just by highlighting that. Isn't that cool? Yeah, okay, I don't know why that does that, but that's pretty cool. Anyway, I guess because I've hit that little tooltip that kind of pops up or something. Would this collide? Here's a final thought perhaps. So we've had functions, we defined them, we've seen how they work. With this x, which is inside, is that x going to collide at all with the outside idea of x? Because x for a while was equal to 25, and then as well it was equal to 5 was equal to 5, and then it was equal to 25 as this function was being run a moment ago. Maybe that's polluted whatever x has on the outside here in this global sort of scope. Nope. If we take a look at what x is, it is a div. So on the outside, it never did mess up. We have a concept then of the things that we define inside of a function are kept to themselves. It's a different scope. Let's call this idea functional scope. Interestingly, this will become incredibly powerful when we'd like to keep things tidy. As we want to keep stuff specific to a certain portion of code, we could put the variables that are used inside of a function, and with JavaScript, that's a very powerful idea just to keep it all on its own. So x on the inside here, if I ask about x, I cannot see the div. I could not understand that there's a div that's called x. Instead, it's been repurposed, and then on the inside, x would only now mean those numbers that I had been passing in. This is our little intro for the moment. And now, if you watch this, I think, a couple times, perhaps, unless you're really bored of it, I guess, I think you're fairly well prepared to come out and dive in with us and have a lot of good groovy fun as we explore further with algorithms and how can we put these gnarly things together and even have objects which would be used. In fact, interestingly, functions can describe how objects might be built. We'll call those constructors, at least in some sense. It's not a full object-oriented language. We find that there's many languages out there that might do object-oriented things like Java and .NET and Ruby and all kinds of really true object-oriented languages. And while JavaScript sort of is an object-oriented language, I mean, like window was a whole tab, and that's an object, or like document inside of this thing was an object, or divs are objects, certainly. The thing is, it doesn't fully have a real pure way of doing tricky, cool things with objects like other languages might. But still, I mean, this guy is like top dog when it comes to popularity of people writing web servers and stuff out there. So while it's not like it's not like incredibly perfect or pure or whatever in regards to how it would act, like many purists might think that other languages are better in some ways. But still, it's the popular one. It's I think what we will gravitate towards then as we have our classes and allow you to be able to have some great success as you might want to go further finding the right web devs interacting with teams, getting some employment and such regarding this, or just like putting your pet project idea out there on the web, boy, you can have this JavaScript code obviously run in the browser itself, and then also we'll look at in class that we can run it also on the server, which is very powerful, honestly. Well, thanks for joining, and we look forward to seeing you in the seminar.